he has written some papers, international character, and Alfredo Jiménez is here, as we said, as technical coordinator of the Latin American Parliament, because Parlatino is one of the institutions that cooperates with IOHE, and we have approached Parlatino in order to talk about the concern that we have in building the space for Latin American higher education and how the parliamentary members or different organizations may generate adequate conditions for this development. So, Alfredo, welcome. Good morning to all of you. First of all, I would like to thank IOHE, the Universidad Técnica de Loja, for the invitation that they have made to the Latin American Parliament to participate in this important event. Yes, it turns out quite interesting to learn that starting a few years ago, there is concern on the part of the international organizations and those institutions that have to do not only with education but also with environment and other important issues to be more involved with the Andean Parliament and to learn what has been done or what could be done in this field. In the case of the Latin American Parliament, it's an international organization that was created in 1964, so this year we have 45 years of existence. Many Latin American parliaments are represented there, in fact the Ecuadorian Parliament also, and this was institutionalized in the year 88 when, after many years of work as a political forum of a high level, its members decided to institutionalize it and declare it an international body, and this was ratified in the Congresses, and ever since the Latin American Parliament has been operating as an international organization, autonomous, in the interparliamentary ambit. I'm not going to take very long in the presentation of Parlatino. We have a webpage, www.parlatino.org, where you can learn about it, and you can also establish contact with us if you need additional information or any suggestions on our part. The Latin American Parliament works by 13 commissions by topic. We have in energy and mines, consumer rights, youth, combating drug trafficking and organized crime, sub-regional issues, local issues, and of course a very important and very large committee that works very well, which is the Commission of Education, Culture, Science and Technology and Communication. In order to be able to support the work of these commissions, if we would like to have our own staff, there would be no budget that we're able to pay for it. There would be no country that see their quotas are just supporting a big bureaucracy rather. So we see that the work can be done by committees. We have over 70 institutional agreements, so we receive support from WHO, PAHO, and the Committee of Science and Technology works with Virtual Educa under the Bello project, and now we're working a lot with IOHE in a partnership that is quite interesting. Why do I mention this issue of the committees? Because the Latin American Parliament, when it judges, when it evaluates, it assesses its activities, and basically the committees of higher education, they're also totally valid. Those global references tell us in what measure do our activities contribute or not. What alternatives do we have so that they contribute in a better fashion for the achievement of the institutional objectives of the Latin American Parliament, which are no different than the purposes of the member countries that are represented. The purposes or objectives are integral development understood as the full satisfaction of human needs in regards to human rights, their respect, the full uh, understanding of what it means to live peacefully, and many social aspirations of our people that will not be achieved unless we integrate ourselves. Never the autarkic position of a country with the borderlines closed, believing that with their own natural and human resources can be developed, has been viable. Never autarky has been viable, much less in a globalized world. The only way in which our countries can have a place in the construct of nations that allow them to negotiate, not at par, but with certain advantage, their national interest, is in the midst of an integration process. Not even the largest economies of Latin America, and not even the economies of the world, consider that they can bring forward the development objectives on their own under authoritative scheme, as I have already said, for the Latin American Parliament. Then it is important that all of our activities, all the activities that we sponsor, contribute, no matter how specific they are, contribute in the general term of objectives, contribute, I say, to the Latin American integration, to the development of countries, to the strengthening of democracy. And in our opinion, as Latin American Parliament, all the education issue and in a more concrete arena, knowledge management, do not escape from. We apply to the way in which we assess our projects, efficacy, efficiency elements. Just to review a little, efficacy is the fact that you achieve the objective. Efficiency is the fact that you achieve the objective in the best manner possible, that is, in the shortest time at the lowest cost, with a minimum of adverse effects, with a minimum of complexity in processes. For example, I am at a hotel nearby the university. If I have to come to the university and I do it on time, then I fulfill my objective. But if before I went by the Tomo and then I went to Catamayo, yes, I reached the university. I was efficacious because I arrived at the university, but I was extremely inefficient because I took too long. The cost was too high. I ran risks and I was delayed. So, to this classic criteria of planning, and this is not a play on words, we have to understand that besides efficacy and efficiency, we have to talk about effectiveness. Effectiveness is a substantial rationality for planning in all fields and education included, and is questioning ourselves the purposes of the task, of the projects, of the activities that we carry out. It is asking yourself if in fact everything that we're working on contributes to Latin American integration, contributes to the development of countries, contributes to common well-being, contributes to overcoming hunger and poverty, contributes to setting aside exclusion, contributes to having a constructive and positive attitude and not predator in face of the environment. These are the questions that we in the Latin American Parliament consider that should be done in all cases, in all sectors, in all the ambits of human activity, no matter how specific the activity that we're referring to is. And to continue playing with the E letter, when we have efficacy, efficiency, and effectiveness, we have achieved excellence. This concept is of the greatest importance because at the moment we're living very agitated world, dynamic, and based on these characteristics of the present reality, they're trying to convince us of a series of things that really conspire against this vision of the long term, always taken as reference, and with the losing side that we're talking about knowledge management in higher education. One of the pressures that is felt very strongly, and not only because it is induced indirectly but also explicitly and very openly, is the short term. We live a society of the short term. A few years ago, short term meant 5 years, midterm 5 to 10, and from 10 years on, long term. And obviously these are mistaken, methodologically speaking, because of a series of reasons that we don't need to analyze now. But the fact is that there was that awareness that you could think in rather long term. Nowadays, in every place, they're telling us that short term is 1 year, the midterm is up to 3 years, and long term 5 years. Why? Because we're in a society that is so dynamic, that is ever changing, that to think beyond 5 years is absurd. But you don't have to fall in the trap. We have popular wisdom that has defined that one doesn't know where it's going, any path is good. We're in a globalized society, and it is said that you have to think globally in order to act locally. From the temporary point of view, you have to do the same. You have to think in long term in order to act immediately. The fact that I'm thinking in the long term does not inhibit or prohibit that I act now. But the thing is, I cannot lose sight of a reference in the long term that has to do with precisely that, with development, with the common well-being, with social welfare, etc. So it is under this criteria that we as Latin American Parliament have been working. We have become involved in a series of studies because another message that is sent together with that of doing everything in short term is almost something that tells us that we should stop thinking. One sees in the messages, stop reflecting upon things, stop meditating, start action, and sometimes one feels ashamed to say that one is reflecting, that one is thinking, that one is rethinking or reconsidering some type of reality. The thing is that there is a phenomenon, and the neuroscience has already stated that since we have a multidimensional thinking, one can think in many things at a time. But the expression of your thought through your linear word, I have no option than to say one word after the other, that lead us many times to consider erroneously that the activities that you're carrying out in everyday life are successive and have an equal value. First I think and then I act. So we're in a society, and always the world and the reality, the environment through which human beings find their position in regard to this world, find it in thinking and saying, and they happen in a simultaneous fashion. So another issue that we promote is not to lose sight of the conceptual framework and philosophical frame that should norm this type of activities. Fortunately, education is a field that has not fallen, where we see that there's a permanent process of reflection. Loja Valona, a series of references where the speakers have made reference in a very solid manner, and I don't need to repeat it. But by all means, along these lines of thought, we don't have to lose sight that higher education has to serve these purposes from the parliamentary point of view. We have some proposals here. We in the Latin American Parliament say, and this is not something that we have invented, the Latin American Parliament is a meeting of 22 countries, and we have a series of organizations that define our nature, our ends, our purposes, our strategies precisely. Next week on the third and fourth day, we will have in Panama a permanent meeting of the steering committee, the directive board, working together with committees, a total of around 300 parliamentary representatives plus deputies from the Andean Parliament, the Central American Parliament. So we have always, and based on what our members have contributed, that the roles are basically to legislate, fiscalize, and discuss the great problems that affect society in the legislative arena, obviously, and I'm going to jump because time is running out. I'm going to go directly to one of the most important roles that Parliament has to carry out, as well as interparliamentary organizations such as the legislative harmonization. And in all the former presentations, and we know by our own experience, there are certain areas that demand legislative harmonization, and one that demands more is education, and particularly higher education, recognizing degrees. It's an extremely difficult task. when you make an assessment from the point of view of the social stakeholders that participate in that process, universities, students, companies, etc., we see that it is not easy. However, we in the area of legislative harmonization, we have made some achievements such as in consumer rights, and based on that, we have developed a methodology for legislative harmonization, which is based on very simple steps, and we have been talking about this with IOHE in order to see the possibility of support from the parliamentary group. First of all, we try to gather the laws that are in force in our countries. We have practically concluded this stage. We have a series of representatives that are working together with UNESCO. The site is called www.parlared.org, and there's a study there with what all the constitutions from Latin America say in regards to education, and at this moment they're loading the national legislations, and what we need is an academic work, a work of execution of making the analysis of legislations. Together with that, we're also beginning to work in a document that defines the theoretical, philosophical, and conceptual framework of this legislative harmonization. What is this? This is a document that defines the principle that should be included even aside from legislative entities. What principles should be considered, what fundamental rights should be guaranteed and protected, and all the philosophical framework behind it. On this, there are many inputs. Some of them have been mentioned today, and this is a subproduct of the harmonization in the legislative arena that has validity on its own because it's a very important philosophical social element for all legislators, not only of Latin America, but of the continent. Next, we have the absolute or relative, first relative harmonization proposals, then the absolute harmonization proposals, where you find that legislations are very similar and that it's possible to homologate laws because they don't go against any policy, any strategy, or any fundamental element in any country. This is extremely difficult. We have only achieved it in the consumer rights area, in the area of labor, but yet in the area of education it's extremely difficult to find similar legislations. Quite the contrary, you find day after day obstacles for people who cannot in order to be able to practice. But there are also interesting networks such as the RAID network, where the students go to a different university and automatically their studies are recognized. So in these cases, we're proposing the relative harmonizing proposals, and this is when the laws are not similar in order to homologate. We're trying to bring closer the stakeholders through institutional covenants or agreements, through parliamentary agreements or executive covenants, so that we can bring them a little bit closer together and so that they feed themselves the harmonization in legislative areas, so that we have finally an absolute harmonization. Here you see that the parliamentary role is fundamental under this type of initiatives, and we cannot set aside. It's important to link, as it has been done rightfully, the parliamentary members ever since the beginning of the process. It has been a tradition that the laws and conventions are given in the last minute, and the members have not participated in all along the process. And one of the things that we have suggested in the Andean parliamentary body is the sub-regional, regional, and Andean parliaments participate actively all along these processes, so that when at the end of the road you have to sanction this through laws, decrees, ratification of treaties, etc., the parliamentary body is well aware of, and there's even the motivation that is needed to raise their arm and say yes instead of impose a bureaucracy to reach those agreements. In brief, dear friends, there's a lot to be said. There's not much time, but I would like to conclude, he says, with the idea that I began. Important things such as the generation of Latin American space for higher education. Important things such as knowledge management, or the utilization of information technology and communication applied to education, are basic tools, and they make sense in as much as they would guide us to the look of or the finding of a planetary solution where there's no exclusion, no hunger, no violence, where there's no aggressions to the environment, and that all that happens in a participatory medium and with full democracy. Thank you very much. We want to thank Alfredo